afternoon, and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolene Whitney. Did you have a teacher who inspired you? For me, it was my old Latin teacher, Roy Starling. And for teachers today, it can sometimes feel like an inspiration places a distant second when it comes to everything from meeting state and federal benchmarks to dealing with parental expectations. When MacLeod-Bluver was announced as Vermont's Teacher of the Year for 2025, Interim Secretary of Education Zoe Saunders said this: Caitlin's ability to inspire, challenge, and uplift her students makes her an exceptional educator and a true leader in the field. We are proud to honor her, and we look forward to the impact she will continue to have on Vermont students and educators. That's high praise, and Caitlin joins us today. She teaches English and history at Winooski High School. Congratulations on this award. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We're happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
And so why don't you start by just telling us about where you work and your students?
I teach at Winooski High School. I teach a 10th grade American literature class. I teach 2 history classes that I kind of self-designed. I'm also a reading specialist, so I do a lot of work supporting literacy for all of our students. And Winooski is one of the most culturally diverse districts in the state. I teach students that have been in this, their families have been in Vermont for generations and generations, and they're sitting next to new Americans that have resettled in Winooski as refugees.
So you wear a lot of hats there.
Many hats, yeah.
Right. And we mentioned earlier in the description of when you were winning this award, inspiration is kind of a big thing that really stood out about you. So what does that mean for a teacher inspiring students? What does that mean to you?
Well, first, I'm very honored that that's a word that's been coming up, because truly, for me, teaching is all about inspiration, and that's my hope, that I inspire kids to find their passion, find their voices, to then use their voices to advocate for what they want in the world, what they want to see in the world for justice. But really, it's my kids that inspire me each and every day. I don't think there's a day that goes by where I'm not smiling because some kid has inspired me. I think of a handful of kids. Ayub last year, he called his senators and representatives for the first time in front of me to advocate for a policy change. I was inspired. I think of Ollie Bear, who gave a really impassioned speech recently about the systemic racism he's faced in our community. I think of Mackenzie, who gave this beautiful performance of Langston Hughes' poem for our Poetry Out Loud presentation. So it's these kids that inspire me every single day, and they're the ones that give me so much hope.
So beautiful give and take.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a lot more, honestly.
Sure. And I think you kind of already spoke to that, but what's something about like kids these days that would surprise people who maybe don't have a kid or a grandkid in high school?
I think kids these days often get a bad rap. I think they're easily seen as lazy, as spending too much time on devices or technology. And for me, this couldn't be further from the truth. Our kids are curious, they're engaged, they're eager learners. They are consuming so much information, and I think sometimes issues that as adults we think are complex, kids have such a keen sense of justice. They know what's right and wrong. They can recognize so quickly when there is a group of people that are being oppressed. So for me, that they can see through kind of all the clouds and really advocate for justice on sometimes issues that adults think are too hard. It's the kids every day that give me hope, and there's been so many times where I'm driving home and I'm like, the youth get it, like they're so with it. So that's been really inspiring for me, and I think many people don't hear those stories all the time.
Yeah, and it's great to hear.
Yeah.
And something that I feel like is on the forefront of a lot of stories about kids in school is technology. Maybe it's the role of TikTok or kind of the advancement of AI. So how has that kind of impacted your work, and what role do you see technology having?
I think, don't get me wrong, there's many challenges with technology, specifically attention span for many of our high school students, especially coming out of the pandemic. At our school and many schools across Vermont, our schools are instigating some sort of cell phone bans, and I think kids are generally very receptive to that and recognize when it's time to put their devices away. But like I mentioned, kids have access to so much information in a way that when you and I were growing up, it was different. And I think as teachers, how do we teach into this technology and help kids understand technology as a tool? And really, how do we prepare them to be active citizens in our world? How do we as teachers help them question their sources, question the biases that they're consuming, ask whose voices are being heard, whose voices are not being heard, and really help them decipher in this busy world with so much information, help them decipher the truth. So rather than bemoan technology, it's not going away. How are we teaching into it as a tool to help them navigate their world as they become young adults?
And I think the view of teachers nowadays, obviously everyone like lauds the work that you all do, but it's also kind of a cynical view of the work that it takes. And so what do you think what it is to be a teacher nowadays?
It is really hard. Like, as I mentioned, I think the full effects of the pandemic, I think, are still not quite well as documented. I think the role of technology, I think, many of our kids, they're struggling with generational poverty, generational trauma, they're unhoused, they have so many barriers in front of their education. And then as educators, budgeting and education funding is a huge issue in our legislative season, really fighting for bare minimum budgets often to support some of our most vulnerable kids. But it is still such joyful work for me, and I think I've been teaching for more than almost 15 years. I wouldn't be able to keep doing it day in and day out if it wasn't hopeful and wasn't joyful. And I think those stories are not often portrayed. Just this week alone, we're in a science fiction short story unit. I've had some of the best discussions I've had all year with kids as they discuss topics that are super relevant to them. We read The Wretched and the Beautiful, a short story that really talks to themes of immigration, which led very quickly into students' own experience as refugees and migrants. And our discussion, even last night, with the Munissi School Board, is discussing whether to become a sanctuary school. And so kids were able to take these texts and have lively, engaged discussions. In one of my history classes, we're studying the Harlem Renaissance. In the Great Migration, kids are making art based off of an artist from that time period to represent and tell a story about something that we've learned about. In another history class, kids are learning and coming up with really cool solutions to famine and climate change in Somalia, the country where many of the students in the class are from. So it is joyful and hopeful and leaves me smiling. And just working with kids is, for me, it's still so fun. So I really enjoy it. And it is hard work, and it's wonderful work for me.
And you've already kind of mentioned you work at the most diverse high school in Vermont, and you teach English there. And so what are the challenges and also the opportunities that you get from teaching a group of people who English maybe isn't their first language?
Yeah, I've gotten this a lot, and I think so often it's what are the challenges, what's hard about it. My quick reframe is, like, as you mentioned, it is our biggest strength having a diversity. Teaching students from such diverse backgrounds is the greatest asset that we have. When I was named Teacher of the Year, I know that a student's mom posted it on her personal Facebook, and there were comments around, how could Caitlin be the Teacher of the Year? Her kids don't even teach English. Her kids don't even speak English. And it's thoughts like these that I hope to combat in this role and really recognize the wonderful strengths that my students do bring into the classroom. And don't get me wrong, it's hard, but what an honor that I have to be the one helping these students navigate how to speak, how to read, how to write English, and then working with such a qualified and smart team of teachers that is helping them do this work. It's not easy work, but it's such an honor to be, the English teacher in front of these kids as they navigate learning a new language and figuring out high school at the same time.
Sure, and kind of to build on that, many of your students are first-generation Americans, or they're very recently living in the U.S. So what does that status mean to them?
I think they are, they're high school kids. They're figuring out what it means to be a young person in this world, what it means to be a refugee in Vermont, what it means to be a young person in our nation. I think right now, once again, immigrants are often under attack. There's frequent untruths and lies, myths that are spread around immigrants, both documented and undocumented. For me, it makes my role as a teacher all the more important that as a school, as a teacher, as a community, we're affirming kids in their full identities and really helping them see themselves as important, helping them recognize that their voices matter, that they have something to say, and that they should say it, and we should listen.
Absolutely, and kind of actually building on that, you recently did kind of a project in your classroom, maybe is the best way to put it, where you simulated a book banning, which is definitely something that's been in a lot of headlines. So what did you do, and how did the students react to that?
Yeah, we read The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. It's a National Book Award winner, And it's really just a story about a Dominican girl growing up, an immigrant growing up in New York, and what it means to question your religion, question your parents a little bit, develop your sexuality. And the book has been at least attempted to be banned in multiple states. My kids loved this book. For some of these kids, it was their first time reading a book. I think of Angela, I think she's read it 3 or 4 times. She just keeps going back to it. So I knew my students would be surprised that it was banned, and I knew it would be a nice transition. Anything I do, I want to make relevant for kids, so a nice way to have some of these bigger conversations around what's going on. So I worked with the superintendent to make a little stunt where he came in and said that the book was being questioned, and he removed the books, physically removed all the books from the classroom. The kids were shocked and laughing. Some of them could kind of see it was a bit of a stunt, but they were quickly just like, what? How is this happening? Even in Vermont? And then quickly, whose parents said? Who complained about this?
And so why do you think it needed to be so dramatic to kind of drive home the point? I mean, you carried out like a whole.
Yeah. I mean, did it need to be this dramatic? I don't know, but I think of any time that I can make learning relevant for kids and that they'll remember it, not just the next day, but in their future, that this will be a moment that stands out to them. And it really led to important conversations around what does it mean to ban books? Who decides your own education? Parents, teachers, educators? And through these conversations then with the superintendent, we learned that there is a book in the school library that is being questioned by a community member. So we had those discussions, the same discussions that we're having nationally around this topic.
Great, and it might not feel like it's happening in Vermont, but like you said, it is, absolutely. And we're almost out of time, but you said that maybe being a teacher wasn't your original plan, but what kind of gave you the spark to follow it?
Back to that word inspired, I was inspired by a mentor teacher. I did a summer teaching program working with 7th grade students, and I worked with my mentor teacher at that time. His name was Noel. He just showed me how amazing this job is. You get to take these big ideas and distill it down to your unit plans and your lesson plans, the language you're using with kids. I was teaching about the Black Death, from the 1300s to a bunch of 7th grade girls, and they were so excited and eager for it. So it was really him and this positive experience.
Great.
He did this program called Boston Teacher Residency. So after undergrad, I followed in his footsteps, and I've never looked back.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Now you can get back to class.
Great. I will. Thank you.
All right, and that takes care of our program for today. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX who teach me something new every day. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.